Hello and welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. I'm your host, Dan Haylett, and today I am so excited for the show as I get to have a conversation with, in my opinion, the preeminent retirement podcaster, blogger, educator, and planner, none other than the retirement answer man, Roger Whitney. Roger, my friend, warm welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast.
Hey, Dan, it's great to be here. Tell me about the name for a second. Humans versus Retirement.
Yeah, what a start. See, the podcast was coming out on you. You're asking me questions. This is wonderful. Humans versus retirement. This is my passion project and mission for people to understand the emotional and behavioral challenges of retirement and how we are all wonderfully human, wonderfully rational. And as human beings, we're simply not wired to kind of, I suppose, take on this new challenge of retirement. So I think it's a bit of a battle, both good and bad. And so, yeah, that's the name.
I have a passion for making stickers. Whenever I have something that resonates with me, I have my graphic designer make a sticker. And one of my favorite stickers is, it just says 3 times, retirement is not a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because it's easy to get trapped in spreadsheets. They're important, but they are a tool.
One of my favorite sayings, Roger, is that our retirement decisions are not made on a spreadsheet; they're made around the dinner table, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah. The spreadsheet has a little impact, but I think they're definitely made in conversation. Roger, I'm really excited, and I think I want to get across to the listeners why I am so excited, and why you are someone that is so well positioned and probably the most qualified to have this conversation with. And, you've won multiple Plutus Awards for Best Retirement Blog and Podcast. And I was doing some research on the podcast, and I'm a fan and a listener, but 8 million downloads and 4 episodes in, which is a phenomenal achievement. And I think all credit to you to getting this new age retirement message out there. So that is just unbelievable consistency, and one that I'm absolutely aiming for. Author of Rock Retirement, and you're always in the top 100 most influential advisors ranked by Investopedia. You're creator of the Rock Retirement Club, which I know you're opening this evening to members. So you're kind of doing that, which is wonderful. And that's a brilliant online community providing education and tools and support for building an amazing retirement. So I cannot wait to get stuck into this conversation. But first, I'd love for you just to tell the listeners a bit more about you, your journey, and kind of how you've got to where you are today.
Well, as you get older, that's harder to do. But the short version is I am a practicing retirement planner, and I've done this for 30 years. And I think that's an important distinction in that I walk life with people every day, making these decisions, not just making the decisions and setting up what the plan will be, but actually, as you get older, having walked the journey from the cradle of retirement to literally the grave of that journey, and seeing all the different changes along the way, and the good things and the bad things and the challenges and the excitements that happen. So I do this for a living. So I'm a big believer in theory is really important, but practical application is where it's at. And when I think about retirement planning, there's a lot of people talking about what you should think about, and they'll happy to educate you in a million ways and try to make you an expert in thinking about it. But there's not many that help people actually do stuff. And that's really what I care about, is people actually doing these things. So currently we run an advisory practice, but we're at that stage now, which is nice, is that we're not really trying to grow it. And we're just trying to help people actually not talk about this stuff, but actually do it so they can create that great life.
I think that's the key, isn't it? That there's all the theory in the world and all the textbooks. It's very challenging to take that into real life and people's unique situations and actually execute on these things. And I think that's where your work has been so amazingly valuable.
And that's where the rubber hits the ground too, in terms of what theories are really something you can do. Many of them aren't, right? They're good rules of thumb and they're good frameworks to think about things, but really don't work in reality because life is so much messier than a spreadsheet or a textbook or anything else. And we only get one shot at this. If you're retiring, if you are retired or getting ready to retire, this is your one shot. And that means that you can't experiment near as much. You have to be much more intentional because you're not going to get a redo.
Absolutely. And actually, we're having that a lot more. Clients are actually saying that to us a lot more. New people that we're working with, new couples and families. It's almost, there's a realization now that this is a kind of, we have one shot at this. And it's actually, retirement is an amazing opportunity, and probably the first time since our childhood that we've got the opportunity to explore with, be curious and explore and align values, etc. And I think there's a realization ever more that there's one shot, and actually it's a really, really challenging thing to do, and I might need some help.
The way I frame retirement is, yes, it's all those things. It's like, it's the first time in your life where you don't have a reward system in the structure of school and then work and all this stuff going on. But the way I frame it is, if you think about teeter-totters or seesaws, right? I don't know if you still have those in England or not. I think they got rid of them here in the US, but we should know what they are, right? They go up and down and up and down. When you're early in retirement or whatever stage you're at, we have a tension that we live with constantly. And that is, on one end, we want to have an amazing life today, right? We know that tomorrow isn't promised to us. At least we know that intellectually. And every now and then we're reminded when we see someone we care about fall ill or pass. But we want to make sure we don't miss the life that we have right now. But on the other end of that seesaw is, we know we could live to 90 or and we want to make sure that that person's okay and that we're a good steward so we don't run out of money and become a burden to someone else. And there's a tension between those two. It's like you're standing on the middle of a seesaw trying to balance those two. How do I use my resources to live today without sacrificing my tomorrow? And unfortunately, it's such a dynamic framework that, depending on how we're wired, we're probably going to do a little bit more of one or the other. And that's a scary proposition, especially when you're early, because you want to go live, right? We're not on the park bench of life like our grandparents were. We're much more active in retirement, especially early, than anybody else. And that's a hard tension that really is not figure-outable, if that's a word. It is just something you have to actually manage.
It leads me on to it leads me beautifully onto my first question, really, to you. And what, I think, there isn't anyone more qualified than you to answer this question. Having walked the walk for so many years and having helped thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people, either directly or indirectly, to retire, and not just retire, but retire well, obviously. What do you believe are some of if you can put one thing on this, the main challenges when it comes to, as you said, this kind of man-made modern invention that we've come to label retirement, and probably first generations of people are going into this now in the way that you just said?
I missed part of that question, Dan.
Okay. Do you want me to go again?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay, we'll just pause it and we'll go again, and I'll clap and bring James in. So I don't think there's anyone more qualified than you to answer this question, having practiced for a number of years and helped thousands and thousands of people either directly or indirectly retire well. What do you believe are some of the, if not the main challenges of this man-made invention, this modern-day man-made thing that we've come to label retirement, and probably first generations of people are coming into this now as it stands?
Oh, so let's think of the challenges, the main ones. Let's go quantitative, and then we'll go qualitative. So the quantitative challenge, probably the main challenge quantitatively, numbers, is that the math doesn't work most of the time. Which is a big deal, right? Yep. We're going to live longer than any generation in history. We typically don't have pensions, at least in the US, like past generations. We are going to be more active and need more money to support ourselves. And the family structure is not quite like what it used to be. And all of these things make the math much more difficult. And the money has to last longer. We're going to have to tap the financial resources more because we don't have pensions. We want to do more things, especially in early retirement. So that math doesn't really work as easily. We have to be much more nuanced about it than past generations. And what tends to happen in my experience is retirement planners come from a math background. And I used to teach the retirement curriculum for the CFP program here at the local university for CFP candidates. And it's still structured like a net present value calculation. And what ends up happening if you can't get a little bit more multidimensional is if the math is suspect or doesn't work, the options presented in the planning are, hey, maybe you should work longer. Maybe you should save more money now. Maybe you should take more investment risk to try to grow it more, right? Maybe you should settle less for later in life. Those tend to be the levers that planners identify to help solve this math problem. Well, let's think about this. Maybe you should work longer. Well, that's a cost to your life, right? Then you have less time freedom. Maybe you should save more. Well, that's a cost to your life. That means you won't see your family. You can't do activities. Maybe you work overtime. Maybe you should take more investment risk to try to grow it. Well, now you are going to have to emotionally go through the roller coaster of markets and perhaps get a bad sequence. Maybe you settle for less later on. All of those decisions suck, to be blunt. And so how are we really that inspired about creating a retirement plan when that's the option set that we are, the decision set that we get, choice set that we get? So quantitatively, that's the biggest challenge. Qualitatively, in my experience, the biggest challenge is, well, remember that I tend to interact with people that have done most of the accumulation well. They're good at denying themselves and in growing assets. So we've gotten it, I think of it like a bodybuilder that is really good at accumulation. So for decades, they've been saving, they've been denying themselves. So that's like, say, doing push-ups and bench presses for decades. They're really good at seeing their assets grow and seeing the fact that they're saving and their net worth growing. And that feels good. That's not just nice from having more financial resources, positive feedback loop of I'm safer and I'm safer. I feel a reward system built in there, right? When you retire, it's like a bodybuilder goes into the gym and all the bench presses are gone away and all they can do is squats, right? They're used to, they have really stout muscles up top, but now they're expected to, one, not earn an income. That's scary because earning income is like getting agency. Remember the first dollar you earned, Dan? I bought baseball cards probably. I have my own money. I can go do whatever I want with it. That's agency, and that feels powerful. Well, when you retire, you lose that superpower. That's scary. I can't earn myself out of all my mistakes. And then you're not only don't you not earn money, you're not going to save money. So you don't get that feedback loop, and you're supposed to take less investment risk so it won't grow. And now I'm actually supposed to go spend this money and draw from it. So psychologically, you go from leaning forward and powerful to, oh my goodness, that's scary. And so psychologically, I think qualitatively, that's probably the biggest challenge that a lot of people deal with.
A couple of observations. Going back to the quant stuff, that the figures and the numbers. In your observation, do you think for too long we've tried to fit the maths to the human, and what we should do is be fitting the human to the maths?
Oh, totally. That's where the 4% rule came from. I saw some shows that you put out that talked about the 4% rule. The 4% rule is taking a accumulation planning framework and trying to duct tape it onto a distribution life. And retirement planning, and I'm more convicted on this ever before, and for a number of reasons, is retirement planning, decumulation planning is a separate specialty from financial planning. The dynamics are totally different from how you think about life, how you plan, how you invest, how you manage cash flow. It is entirely different. And the 4% rule comes from financial planners and the industry trying to attach the current structure to decumulation, and it's a mess. It's just a mess.
Absolutely.
It's like having, we have this show in the US called Botched, where it goes through people that had really bad plastic surgery.
We've got it here too. Yeah.
And at its worst, a financial planner doing retirement planning is like having your dentist do a facelift. They are a medical doctor, but they're not, well, not a dentist, but even a general practitioner doing a facelift. They're a medical doctor, but they're not a specialist.
Do you see that as I mean, I was talking about this today, actually. Do you see that as a big problem when we've got this real unique life transition and people are searching for the GP to provide heart surgery? That must be an issue that, that is just going to cause people quite, a few problems, right?
It's a huge issue on both ends. One is the certified financial planners, they don't understand that, or don't. It's not that they're doing this with ill will. They think of themselves as retirement planners, and many of them have a number of the skills, but they're not trained for it in a specific way. So on that end, many don't know what they don't know. On the other end, on the client end, I really feel for someone trying to find a good retirement planner or a certified financial planner. There are so many designations, and just like with doctors, there are general practitioners that went to Harvard that are quacks, right? And there are some that are very capable, and there are people that have gone to the state medical school that are geniuses. So on the consumer end, I can imagine that everybody sounds the same, and it's difficult for them to navigate what's a safe place for me. Because even the ones that are, more asset-based, they're all talking the same thing. Some of it is just faux, and some of it is, faux wood versus really hard oak. And the consumer can't really know on the front end. And that's a lot of the difficulty.
What would you, for the listeners for the people listening in that are approaching this particular decision and phase of life, what would be have you got a couple of things to look out for these, if you're searching for someone to be, part of your team and to be your retirement planner and guide and everything that comes with it? Is there anything in your experience that you should look out for?
I think you want to interview whoever you're going to interview. They will tend to want to talk investments and investment solutions. So that's one thing to look out for. I think if you're going to hire somebody, if I was going to hire somebody, I'm hiring them. I want them to have walked the journey a number of times. I don't want them to gain experience on me. And they should be able to clearly articulate a process that they use consistently. There's never a one-off. They use the same type of protocols from a diagnostic to a treatment to a management end of it that is very consistent, and they do that with every single client, and they don't have things on the side. And so they should have a clear process that they can articulate. They should work with people exactly like you. They probably aren't working with a 30-year-old trying to save. They should have protocols that they follow. And the investment part of it should be the part of a much bigger whole. The more they're talking about investments and solutions, and the earlier they're talking about it, the more likely they are not a project manager or a practitioner, would be my guidance. We created a worksheet years ago. I probably should update it, of questions you should ask if you're interviewing a financial advisor or a retirement planner. And when you're interacting with retirement planners, because the industry is structured, I don't know how this is in the UK, Dan, but the industry is structured from a business standpoint of referrals and familiar structures, in that we'll be your friend, we'll guide you, we'll talk investments. And then know, like, and trust are what's most important. And it's hard to not work with people you like. It's easier to trust them. And it's easier not to have a higher bar. I would take it much more in a clinical approach as much as you can of, I love my clients, but I have an obligation of what I'm supposed to do. And that's more important than, me remembering the name of every single kid and where they went to school. I mean, that's human. That's important, but I have a job to do, and you want them to have a job to do. And as a client, you have a job to do. Your job is to be a good collaborator with them, because by you having some grit and being focused will help them have some grit and be focused, and that will likely lead to better outcome.
Yeah.
Because the typical meetings are so my understanding, I've talked to, like you said, thousands of people. The typical meetings, how are the family? Here's what's going on in the markets. Oh yeah, your plan looks okay. This is what we think we're going to do going forward. Here's some little moves we made. That's not really a good financial planning meeting or retirement plan. So those are some things I would suggest.
That's great advice, and obviously concur. I think it's exactly the same over here. I think unfortunately it's the most sought after group of people for financial advisors, and yet I believe the most underserved at the same time. So I think there's huge amounts of work to be done when it comes to helping people deal with retirement as a holistic concept, not just a portfolio concept, which I know you've been doing for years, and obviously what I'm trying to do with this. So
one thing I want to be clear about, Dan, is I'm not beating anybody down.
No,
I grew up in this industry, and this is how industries evolve.
Mm-hmm.
I just try to spend my time creating what I think should be.
Yep.
And not work that. And so I think it's much, when we get into criticism of individual people or entities, there's some good friction that can be had there, I guess, but it's actually somewhat lazy. It's harder to go just build what you think should be. And that's, your podcast is an example of that, right? Let's just go build what should be. Yep. And help bring everybody along and help us improve us.
For sure. Absolutely. 100%. I want to touch on a point you mentioned, really, which I think is one of the biggest challenges that I see out there when it comes to more emotional and psychological impacts and challenges of retirement. This paycheck anxiety thing, the loss of the paycheck that you mentioned, the loss of the safety blanket, the loss of the feeling that I can get through anything that's in front of me because I've got more, there's stuff coming in. I talk about paycheck anxiety a lot to people and how they might feel, month 1, month 2, month 3, when, you haven't got that safety blanket coming in. Have you got any observations around your, the work that you've done with people before around that? I think digging deeper into that is a real key subject.
So do you have any kids, Dan?
I do. 2 daughters. Okay. Yes.
2 daughters. I have a daughter and a son. They're in their 20s now, but if you probably had this experience, and anybody that's had children's like their routines, right? They like to have their routines. They want to eat at a certain time. They want to go to bed at a certain time, generally. Adults are exactly the same way. We have a rhythm that we become comfortable with, and that gives us security because it operates. I know I'm that way. My wife will, when I travel, I come back and I'm totally discombobulated because my rhythms are all off. When I'm sleeping, what I'm doing every day. I like travel, but I get off and it's uncomfortable. Well, in retirement, we're going from having a rhythm. You have all these debts that you have to pay yourself, and these are your bills to pay for your life, right? And for years, we've had a rhythm where a paycheck has come in to cover those debts every single month or every other week and so forth. And if you've ever been laid off or without work, that's stressful. Well, when you retire, that rhythm goes away as well, right? You don't have this monthly paycheck that hits, for some people, literally the same day. You have to create the structure. So the question and the challenge in retirement is, how do I keep that rhythm? Because I know, even consciously, this makes me feel safe and comfortable. And so that's the challenge. The way that we like to do it is just like I run a business, you run a business. If you were to look at my checking accounts or my bank accounts, I have a payroll reserve. And at the beginning of every year, I build that up. So I know exactly not just how I'm going to pay myself, but how I'm going to pay my employees. And then that gives me security and hopefully my employees securities, because I don't have to worry about having money come in next month and wondering how I'm going to pay people. So in retirement, you want to do the same thing. We build pie cakes, which is just a weird name off of bucketing system or time segmentation. So when we have clients retire, we go through the process of building 5 years of a payroll reserve as a benchmark. You can you can optimize it from there. So they know exactly how they're going to pay for their life for the first 5 years of retirement. And this is, we can get into optimization and is that optimal, blah, blah, blah. I don't really care. But what it does is it gives people clarity of exactly how they're going to get paid. And it also gives them a lot of optionality that they don't even realize. So when they change their mind about their life a year in, that they have a lot of liquidity to be able to move around to redirect the ship, and so to speak. So that's how we approach that problem, because it's that human rhythm of things that we want to maintain, especially when they're already dealing with the psychological impact of, what we talked about before in terms of not working.
Yeah, I think it's really important. We do something very, very similar. And also it's that what I've done for people and try and do is go, well, what was the salary? What was the paycheck? And we could replicate that. Right? So if this was £1,000 a month that you were, £2,000 a month, let's just give you a regular income. So it feels like we can transition this nicely. But as you said, I think the first 12 months to 3 years of retirement is the most exciting time, because you've got all this freedom, but also the most nerve-wracking time at the same time, because you've got, you don't know whether you can spend or feel free, or you've got all these transitions going on. So I think that ability to pre-fund those first number of years is so important and give structure.
There's this concept I'm sure you've heard of. It's called hope, right? Hope is really important, and the financial acumen that can be brought can help enrich people with hope. And you need 3 things for hope. You can't have hope without 3 things. First is you have to see a better future. You have to have a goal that inspires you. You're not going to have any hope if you can't see a better future for yourself, or a good future for yourself. But that's not enough, because that's just like a dream. The second thing you need to have in order to have hope is agency. Agency is critical. Power of Agency, a wonderful book. If I have some power, some control to act to create this better future for myself, and we could talk about agency forever, but that's not enough, because even if you have agency, you could run around doing a lot of things frantically, but not really, or not know what to do with all this agency you have. You need to have pathways where you can apply the agency, and you have to have some flexibility to adjust your pathways to get to that future. So when you think of building a retirement planning process, you want to build something that will help them see a better future for themselves, help them identify their agency, and guide them to applying that agency through all the craziness of the world and life. And having this paycheck structure is part of giving them some agency and seeing the pathway of how all this is going to work.
While we're on it then, let's dig for a couple of minutes into agency, because I think it's really, really important, and I obviously absolutely concur with you. Give me your thoughts and views as we dig deeper into kind of agency, and how can people grab agency? How can people retain and enhance agency in retirement?
Well, for us, we take an agile approach. We borrowed from agile project management and applied it to retirement planning. Because the general retirement planning, I'm generalizing here, of course, there are some amazing people doing amazing things. The general conversations I hear that people have with other advisors is, we got a great plan. Let me show you all the charts. It's going to be okay. That robs everybody of their agency. Just trust us. You're going to be fine. That's not very empowering. So we use an agile project management. So we're called Agile Retirement Management. That's the name of our firm, where we think of every client as a project, and we collaborate with each client. And in the club, we teach people how to build this structure so they can have a structure for decision-making and constantly identify what opportunity or what risk or what planning thing can I work on right now. And then we get into a rhythm of always having things that we're working on to take little baby steps on to either improve or shore up the journey. And so everything we focus on is actually, what can we do next? What's next? What's next? What can I do? How can I do it? Getting some assistance and accountability, celebrating the win, which is going to lead to, okay, great. What do we do next? That's the kind of rhythm you want to get into, either if you're managing your assets yourself or having someone do it, because that's going to give you agency and keep you working the plan. So a really good example that came up back when COVID, you guys have COVID over there? Yeah, you did. COVID was scary.
Only a little bit. It was fine.
Yeah. When COVID happened, I had 5-minute or so triage calls with everybody that we work with or walk life with, but we also had a big meetup in the club with 100 people or so at the time live, and all we did for an hour was talk about what can we do, right? The framework for dealing with stuff, especially when you feel like you don't have agency, is acknowledge what happened. Like, let's take COVID. COVID happened. Acknowledge the fear and the uncertainty and the fact that this just sucks. Start to reaffirm, okay, but I'm going to be okay. There's something I can do here. And then have an action. So like an example, in the COVID meetings, we had clients that, financially speaking, we did this as well, downgraded their cable provider. Things that were inconsequential in the grand picture of things, but it gave them agency because we all want to be part of the solution. And that's an extreme example. Obviously, others had to make more robust adjustments, but what do I do next? What do I do next? That's the kind of rhythm that we need to get into. Agency is critical, and not just in retirement, but anytime in life.
And I love you do these sprints, which I'm which I think is all part of that, isn't it? It's identify the thing, have agency over it, go get it, start again. Which I think is a real crucial part of, as you said, any of life, but particularly when you have time. I think agency for me becomes ever more important when you haven't got the distraction of work. You've got kind of a structure around work, and obviously an agency can kind of almost take care of itself a little bit through work and responsibilities. If you haven't got those, you need to kind of create your own and be responsible for your own, which I think is a really hard transition to go through.
So naturally, we are teleological in nature. We are, as humans, we're teleological. We like to set targets and shoot and hit them. There's, we could go into that in depth if we wanted to, but as an example, what we do in the club and as with clients is every year we set targets for the entire year. What do we want to accomplish this year? Maybe it's something really hard. I want to update my estate plan. Maybe it's, I've had targets of, I'm getting ready to retire. I've been traveling. I don't have a real robust social network locally. I want to get clarity on how I'm going to draw from in our country, IRAs, etc. So we brainstorm targets for the year, and then we call that list to the things that are the biggest levers that could have the biggest impact materially, or things that are just important to us. And then we map out, okay, when do we have time to do these targets that we've identified? So we map them out by quarter, and that becomes our benchmark for the year. So a typical, and this is what we teach in the club, and I think is helpful, is 90% of the time we're not paying attention to what's going on in the world. We're working our targets so we can hit those, and then it becomes the benchmark for how are we doing. I mean, we pay attention to the numbers and we iterate there and we incorporate that, and we crisis management when it's needed. But then the rhythm becomes, we're using a process where everybody has full agency for the most part, and can achieve these things because they're incremental. And that creates a wonderful feedback loop, just like work does, in terms of having a project and getting the project and then celebrating it and then moving on to the next one. Except that the project's your life and not, some entities, priorities.
Which is more important, right? I mean, that's kind of this thing we talked about. It's like, like the most important thing you can have agency over. So, and why leave it to chance?
I was on a really popular financial podcast a month or two, well, guys, 3-4 months ago. And we were talking about some of these concepts. And someone said it, one of the co-hosts said it, and they didn't say it in a bad way, but that softer stuff. I'm like, whoa. No, it's not softer stuff. It's the point.
Stop there. No.
It's the point.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that as planners, but in our life, we have to remember that. It's easy to let the tail wag the dog when we get down into geeky strategies.
One thing actually that fits all into this that I think is really important, and I've read stuff that you've put out there about this, and we've talked about having agency and having goals and shooting the arrow and going forward. But I think one of the hardest things that we have to accept in retirement is uncertainty. And and I think, I see it all the time. I live in a world of uncertainty because I've got, many retirees live sitting there, and we don't know where we're going. We have no idea what tomorrow brings. We had some level of certainty at work, although I think falsely. But I'd love just to dive in and hear your thoughts, because accepting uncertainty is damn hard, but crucial to, I think, be able to live a retirement of purpose.
Yeah, there's three things we need to accept. And this really was driven home to me by a gentleman named Phil Stutz. There's a wonderful documentary with Jonah Hill on Phil Stutz, who's a psychiatrist, brilliant man. And his quote is, "We will never be exonerated from three things: uncertainty, pain, or the need to do work. Those three things are constants. Those three things are life." And most of the angst that you might argue, all of the angst that we cause ourselves is trying to or pursuing getting exonerated from either uncertainty, pain, or the need to do work. That is life. And so that documentary Stutz is amazing. Phil Stutz is such a blessing. But uncertainty is life, right? And that is really, really uncomfortable, right? And there's science on the brain is lazy. Managing uncertainty is hard. We want shortcuts. We want certainty. It just makes life so much simpler, right? But it's just not there. And from a advisor standpoint, I love my clients in a way. I want them to prosper. I don't want them to deal with ambiguity. I would love to give them certainty, but it's just not possible. But I have to catch myself. And so a book that also helped me a lot in this is Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. And the
Wonderful
structure,
book.
Wonderful. I'm rereading it right now. And she compares chess to poker. And in chess, there's a closed system. It's a closed system. You can always go back and figure out where the move was that caused you to lose. In poker, it's an open system. It's much more dynamic. You have what cards are going to come up, which is randomized. You have the other players that are interacting on the table, and you don't know what they're going to do and their calculations, and you can make every single move right and still lose. And I think of that as life and retirement from a planning perspective and this is the realization I had as my journey and be doing this forever, because I've done it wrong a million different ways as I've learned and shed my skin, is all of our focus tends to be in planning on investments, on markets, on the economy, on interest rates and politics, all things that we have absolutely no control over. But we spend so much time thinking we can figure them out and zig and zag correctly. And it's just a loser's game. Charles Ellis' book, Loser Game, drives that point home very eloquently. I can't speak eloquently, and so if you can't, this is what the realization came to me as I was diving into Agile, is if you can't figure things out, which we can't figure out life or retirement, then the game becomes, how do I build systems and frameworks to manage the uncertainty? That's the key. Managing the uncertainty in a consistent way and being really organized in your thinking, because ultimately we're just going to get to a bunch of judgment calls. And so if it's a judgment call, which is a fancy word for a guess, you want to do that in an organized way so you can feel confident that you were not just winging it, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely. I'd say all the time in our first planning meeting with clients, when we do show them some of the software that we use to crunch the numbers and create some charts that are obviously part of the process. But I kind of say to them that this is well-researched, hugely baked in evidence, and really thought out, and really well researched, baked in evidence, well thought out. And we spend a lot of time on this stuff, and it's guesswork. It's, well researched, thought out guesswork, because we just don't know what tomorrow brings. So we can have that sense of direction, but ultimately it's all guesswork. And we have to be, as you said, with your business and where you've taken it from, we have to be agile. We have to understand to be flexible. I think it's one of the biggest, or one of the most successful traits I see of people that are successful in their retirement. It's agility and flexibility, and the ability to kind of, work on things as they come around. So Absolutely.
Yeah, optionality is very undervalued. You want to undervalued asset, especially in retirement planning or financial planning, is optionality.
That's a great way to start to close off here. And as we move into the last few things that I want to discuss with you, I've got some questions I want to ask, if that's all right.
Okay, I have one thing I want to make sure I discuss, so don't let me not do that, please.
No, 100% we can do that. Given your experience in all of the work you do, both with the club and on a one-to-one basis over the years, what have you learned in terms of how Roger Whitney's retirement would look?
I don't believe in the concept of traditional retirement. So I think it's much better to design a life that you don't want to retire from. And I think the younger generation gets this a lot more than, say, baby boomers. Baby boomers were sold work, build, and you'll be able to live the picture in the brochure. And I'm not quite a baby boomer, but we were on this rail of career to get to someplace else. And there's some value in that to a point, but we end up sacrificing a lot of our lives and having a lot of regrets. I know my mom, who passed away early. A number of people don't get to that rainbow, and they look back with, wow, one of the top 5 regrets of the dying is I wish I hadn't worked so much. And so we tend to think of retirement like a light switch. I think of it as a dimmer switch. There's a lot of in between. And I think the more that we create in betweens, and this doesn't have to be necessarily for money if you don't have to have money, it can be volunteering. I was at the hospital yesterday, and there was this lady, Miss Brenda, who's walking with a walker with wheels on it. And she has volunteered there for 30 years. And she was guiding my son to where the ICU was with somebody we were visiting. We weren't meant not to have projects and to have interests. So Roger's retirement is to try to navigate that without trying to get to some destination. I want to be financially secure, but I don't ever plan on not working, whether that's for money or not.
Wonderful. I'm with you. That's exactly where I am. So if I can kind of very briefly put you into your CFP shoes and kind of say, look, we've done some work, me and you, I'm your client. We've established that I've got enough money for this retirement that I desire. What would be your number one tip for me to live a happy, healthy, and wealthy retirement?
Stay curious. I'm reading Eleanor Roosevelt's book currently, and that's the word that keeps coming to mind. Curious people have much more dynamic lives. Their lives don't get smaller.
And they live longer, right? I mean, it's proven, yeah?
I don't know, but be extremely curious, because what tends to happen is our life, and what I wanted to share is around this framework. And so if you have the money part figured out, what do you do to create a great life? Right? Because aging is a thing, right? And lives can shrink as we get older, socially, energy-wise. So I'm working on these pillars. There's 4 pillars to the financial end. Have a vision for your life, organize your resources to make sure that it's feasible to achieve the vision, and then make it resilient. And then you can think about optimizing. So those are those 4 pillars in the financial realm. In the non-financial realm, there are 4 pillars to creating a great life. It doesn't really matter money-wise. This could apply to anybody. Number 1 is, and these are sequential, you got to do them in these order, in my opinion, currently, is your energy. You have to work on your energy, right? And that's going to be moving, eating, sleeping, and breathing. If you don't have energy, you can't show up for anything. Second is going to be your mindset. There's a difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. A growth mindset is, I can't do that yet. A fixed mindset is, I can't do that. And there's a lot of science behind the fact that our minds create new pathways. It doesn't matter what age you are. It's a use it or lose it type of thing, your mind, right? And you're battling genetics and other things for sure, but there's a range there that you can influence with agency. And you can't really have a growth mindset if you don't have the energy. That's why energy comes first. You don't have energy, you're sort of, you're like my Great Dane laying here. You just passed out. So energy, mindset, and then passion. Happy people have projects. They're curious. They're like, well, I wonder if I could do that. I have a buddy who's 65. He's learning how to ride a long skateboard. They're curious. And then third is going to be, sorry, I was looking at your relationships, right? Your obviously your family, but your relationship with the community and then so forth. And what's interesting is if you do this work before you think about your retirement goals, you actually will expand your vision of what your retirement could be. But it's very hard to have relationships. And we've all been around people that all they do is talk about all the things that are aching them. And they're just, they're not, a little extreme here, not that interesting. But if you have energy, and you have a growth mindset and you have projects that you're excited about, you're probably going to be a really interesting person and be able to have relationships because people are going to want to be around you. And so that I think is critical to, doesn't matter how much money you have. We know plenty of people with money that are really miserable people. Doesn't matter if you have very modest assets and live a modest life materially relative to others. If you have these four things, you have an amazing life.
Absolutely. That, just resonates hugely with me and conversations I have. And to put it like that is, I think the thing here is building the life independent of the zeros in the bank balance is so crucial. Because I think, again, if you let the maths dictate the human, you don't actually feel like what an abundant life is, what contentment looks like, what that vision is, and I think that's so crucial.
This is counterculture. This is countercultural.
Absolutely.
And more lip service is paid to this than actual work, and that's important. This is a lot more is said than done in these realms. And that's why
that comes back to your first point, isn't it? The very first point, 45, 50 minutes ago, around you've been doing this. That's what you're passionate about, actually doing it, not just saying it and putting theory out in the world.
I want people to do this stuff. That's why I'm here.
My last question for you before we wrap up, and I think you've got a question for me, maybe, unless we've talked about it. But,
we hit it. I got to get my 4 pillars of non-financial out. I'm good.
Amazing. So you've been working with retirees for obviously many years. We've talked about what do you think is and you may have touched on this and you may repeat yourself, but I think it's a wonderful way to finish. What do you think is the biggest opportunity in this wonderful phase of life that people are going into?
It's the first time they get to organize their lives. Now, I'm going to preface this in saying that, like many of us, I work with a subset of people that have options. They have the financial resources. Mm-hmm. So this is skewed. It still applies to everybody, but they mostly have won the financial game, whatever the heck that means. Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure I preface that. But the biggest opportunity is to organize their lives so they can live a life without regret. Because here's what happens is, it doesn't matter how much money you are, you're always going to be afraid. You're always going to be worried because the unknown. And for those that have the most means, they still will have that. And it's very easy without having a compelling vision to deny themselves and deny the use of their resources for the world. And then what will end up happening is when they get into their 70s or their 80s, they're going to realize, oh, I'm going to have a lot more money than I thought I had. Mm-hmm. I've seen it. It's like a tipping point. Mm. And then what happens is now they start to look backwards and say, I could have given that money to the charity or to the children or to my family. I could have taken my husband on that trip that he always dreamed about, who perhaps is no longer with them. Who knows? I could have done these things, created these experiences, and I didn't. That's tragic, right? And Brownie Ware's 5 Regrets of the Dying. It's a great book. It's a great article. Just look at the 5 things, right? I don't know if I'll remember the top 5 off the top of my head. I wish I wouldn't have worked so hard. I wish I would have stayed in touch with my friend. I wish I would have allowed myself to be happy. I wish I would have lived a life true to myself. Oh, what's the 5th one, Dan? I can't recall off the top of my head.
Anyway. I know. I've read the book too. It's amazing. I'll put a link to the book in the show notes because it is.
But you get the point. You get the point. And I don't think vision wise, and I don't think of this is where Roger wants to be in his life 5-10 years from now. I have some ideas, but there are just so many pathways. I'm not marching towards some peak. So some people have that mindset. I resonate much more with regret minimalization. The first thing I write every day is day 1. Today's the day. I'm all in. Because want every day to have as little regret as possible. You string enough of those together, as Phil Stutz would say, you're stringing pearls. That's how you create a great life. I don't even know if I answered your question. I will say the biggest struggle people have, honestly, and this is through especially people with means, is confidence.
So as you said, sounds counterintuitive, right? But it 100% is correct.
Confidence. They know it. A lot of the conversations I have, the general theme is, oh yeah, you have enough money. I have all these things I want to do, but they can't get themselves to do it. I do have a good story around that comes from the club. If you're okay with me telling it,
let's do it.
Okay. So I was having and this I've told this publicly before, and we'll keep the person anonymous. This was a club member in mid-60s, and we used to have one-on-one office hours, and she and I were having a conversation. Very clear that she had enough money. Money wasn't an issue. And she started to talk about wanting to visit Europe. Had never been, and been something that she's wanted to do for years. So she's building this story. Got enough money. I've always wanted to visit Europe, and I'm going to do that in the next 5-10 years. And then we pivot, and she's telling me about her sister and her mother. Her mother's blind, and there's this genetic thing. She doesn't know if she has it or not. And her younger sister is starting to show some signs of degeneration in her eyesight. And I'm just listening. You might know the answer of what I'm thinking of in my head. Got the money. You're really passionate about this. There's this genetic time bomb that you don't know if it's going to blow off in your head. Why the heck aren't you going to Europe right now? And a light bulb went off in her head. She's like, oh, I never thought of that. I mean, I'm being a little dramatic, but it was like, huh. And so what we did in the club, and she gave me permission, I did it anonymously, is I explained this story to the club in a live meetup on Zoom with 100 plus people. And I asked them to give encouragement, and I asked them for resources and travel tips. Where should you go? What should you pack? And words of encouragement. And we put all that into a PDF and gave it to her. Literally, like 4 months later, she texts me a picture from Munich.
Amazing.
That's
unbelievable,
point, right? But that confidence is hard to find when you're by yourself. You need to have each of us as a nutrient for each other. So sometimes we can't do this by yourself. But that's the big challenge: is how do we live that way and feel confident about it, and not just grin and bear it?
Roger, that's such a wonderful story to wrap up on. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that just resonates with me. We could probably do a whole episode on stories, right? Maybe we'll do that one day. We'll do an episode on retirement stories, because you've got many more than I have, and I've got a load. So I think we should do that. But look, I really, really, really want to thank you for your time, your wisdom, your knowledge today. It's been an honor to kind of have this conversation with you and riffed on our passion. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Love what you're doing. It's day one. Let's go do this.
Let's do it. Thank you for listening to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with me today. Until next time, take care.